Luntz Global. So, Frank, it's a delight always to have you with us. Before we go forward to the runoff, let's go backwards to this election we just had in Georgia. What did we learn from how people voted on November 3rd that might inform what happens in January?
Well, there's a greater degree of working class voters that are swinging towards the Republicans than ever before. That Trump and the GOP did better among them than even Ronald Reagan when he hit the high water mark in 1984. Conversely, there is a greater degree of upper middle class voters, particularly women, particularly from suburbs, particularly moms with children, who are voting Democratic. And that is a high for the Democrats really since the 1960s. So you see this socioeconomic shift. Republicans shockingly doing well among working class, and Democrats shockingly doing well among upper middle class.
What was the turnout like? Because one of the things I hear is who wins these elections will depend on getting the vote out. But it must have been a massive vote in Georgia as it was elsewhere around the country.
The turnout in Georgia, I'm told that dead people voted in Georgia.
Watch it. We might get a tweet on that.
In fact, there's a break between, if you've only been dead for about 10 years, you tended to vote Democrat. If you've been dead for 10 to 30 years, you tended to vote Republican. And if you've been dead from, I don't know where the joke goes.
Yeah.
But it's a legitimate point that every human being voted. But here's the challenge for the GOP. And I'm going to surprise you. I think the Democrats have a fair shot at winning at least one of the seats because they can't wait for January 20th. They're watching the news more. They're participating more. They've been energized by all that's been going on. On the Republican side, because Trump keeps communicating that the system is rigged, the system is broken, there is corruption. I'm wondering whether there won't be a measurable segment of the GOP audience that stays home on January 5th because of what Trump's been saying, because he's been so demonizing the electoral process. And if they stay home, the Democrats win those seats.
At the same time, if you look at Mr. Ossoff, John Ossoff, he's got, I think, 90,000 votes he's got to make up. That's a pretty big number, isn't it?
It's a big number. He's also got $1 gazillion to make it up with. The Democrats have never been as well funded. The truth is, we've never had an election like Georgia before, and now we've got two of them. I believe that this is going to be as consequential for your viewers as anything in the presidential race, because if the Democrats win this, it means that Trump's tax cuts are repealed. It means that Puerto Rico and D.C. become a state. It means that they end the filibuster rules. So much changes if the Democrats win both of those seats.
You mentioned the money. There's an enormous amount of money. I've seen like $100 million supposedly is going to go into this for this campaign. Is there any point at which the people who live in Georgia, the natives, get resentful that so much money from out of state is coming in? Or do they love the attention?
Well, it's both. They love the attention and they want people to go away. They like the money being spent in their state, but they're tired of the political advertising. I wonder if people will still be watching it by the end of December. There's another 7 weeks down there of this kind of campaigning after having months, because Georgia became a swing state. And Georgia is not the same place today that it was even 4 years ago. Georgia is genuinely in play. Democrats have a real opportunity in the statewide races. They obviously now have proven that they can win in a national campaign. And even their legislature is likely to change over time. So you've got ground zero for all of politics in a state that you can drive in any direction and hit a border within 4 hours. So if you love politics, this is the place to be. And if you hate politics, I suggest you get out of the state right now.
Yeah, and if you run a local television station, it's a particular place you want to be right now. But I guess my question, you're suggesting this is that money going to be well spent? Because it's not like they haven't been seeing political ads all through the fall. Is a lot of that $100 million going to be wasted in your judgment?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And it's going to just agitate the population and divide them even more. Georgia is a tinderbox of emotion because of what happened in the wake of George Floyd and what's been happening down there, frankly, since the last gubernatorial election, which itself is very divisive. It is ground zero for national politics. It is ground zero for social justice and political reform. It is ground zero for just about every controversy that we have in this country. And probably what matters most is it's ground zero for voter participation. So you have people engaged, involved, agitated, divisive, all the good and certainly all the bad are happening in that state right now.
Well, it's quite a story, no question about it. Frank Luntz, pollster and founder of Luntz Global. We're going to have more with Frank coming up in our second hour at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Coming up, former President Clinton and former Prime Minister Tony Blair with their thoughts on the U.S. relationship toward China going forward. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. China may be. Frank Luntz of Luntz Global is still with us from the first hour of Balance of Power. So, Frank, thanks for staying with us. In the first hour, we talked specifically about the state of Georgia. Let's take a step back now. More broadly, you've had a chance to study what happened on November 3rd and the aftermath. What are the main lessons you took away, both about where we are and are headed as a country, but also to the extent to which pollsters can really tell us about that?
Well, I'll give you 5. And the first is on polling itself. The idea that Trump voters do not like talking to pollsters. They feel that either their opinions will be misrepresented, or that they will be ridiculed, or that they'll be helping the power elite, the swamp in Washington, D.C. And so they don't lie to pollsters. Let's correct that misinterpretation right now. They don't lie. They simply don't participate. Second is this socioeconomic change, that it is now possible for Republicans to win a segment of the population that used to be very hostile to them, mainly the working class voter, the manufacturer, the individual who works with their hands, or the person who does not have a college degree. And it is equally remarkable that the Democrats have the capability to win upper middle class voters that were once considered very strong for the Republicans. Third is that a lot of states that were never in play, namely Georgia and Texas, are now going to be swing states. And other states that were once swing states, such as Ohio and Missouri, are now solidly in one camp or another. Fourth is that every human being who could participate did. That actually, in that sense, the vibrancy of our democracy is not seen anything like this in my lifetime. This is the highest turnout in 100 years. And fifth, Joe Biden, if you look at the advertising that he engaged in, it was actually a relatively high percentage. Almost 30% of his ads were positive ads. We've not seen that since Barack Obama in 2008. It is proof both Obama and Biden ran very positive campaigns, and they had a very positive result. And that negative advertising, Donald Trump, 97% of his campaign was negative, and he didn't do so well.
That's a fascinating point that had not occurred to me. What does it tell us anything about identity politics? Because perhaps it reinforced it. On the other hand, we had President Trump doing better than expected with some minority communities he was not expected to do. Black males, for example, I think he was in the mid to upper teens, wasn't he? Black females, he doubled it. Now it went from 4 to 8 or something like that. And Latinos, Latinx, he did significantly better. Again, not a majority or approaching majority, but better than expected. Does that tell us anything about a breakdown of identity politics?
It just says that 3 or 4%, that there's a shift to 3 or 4%, and that can make a difference in a statewide race. But it also says to the Republican Party that you're not going to elect another president if you're still only getting 12% of the African-American vote. If you're only getting a third of the Latino vote, they're going to have to do better than that. It also says to the Democratic Party that they better stop taking these voters for granted, because if they do, they're going to lose.
So if, in fact, we're having some difficulties with the polls, as you suggested, because some of the key people who we need to talk to just don't want to talk to us if we're pollsters, what can be done about that? How can somebody as a pollster, how can you as a pollster try to remedy that situation and make sure we're not making mistakes?
Well, one of the reasons why we did not get it wrong is that we have a very different beginning in our surveys. We tell people, here's your chance to tell elected officials what you think, what matters to you, what you prioritize. And we do this repeatedly. Every 2 minutes in the survey, they get a reminder that their opinion matters, that their voice matters, and people are listening to it. By doing that, we get about a 10% higher completion rate, which is exactly what you need to get them to participate. And the second thing is actually talk to the voters face to face. I've been doing focus groups, and in fact, I believe that Bloomberg aired one of them after one of the debates.
Yes.
That in talking to the voters, you understand why they feel the way they do. Polling only tells you what, and it quantifies things. But the focus group explains the why, and you also get a chance to hear the passion. And for me, that was very important to realize that while there were some votes that were prepared to go back to Donald Trump, they would not vote for him if he continued to have the persona that he's had over the last 4 years. And David, I want to make news. Donald Trump absolutely could have won this election. If he had had a better first debate, he would have won. If he had simply not engaged in his mask non-policy, I guess you'd call it, he would have won. If he had not picked a fight with John McCain, he would have won. That it was actually, even though he lost by 4% of the popular vote, the electoral vote, there are enough states that were within 1 to 1.5%, that Donald Trump could have won this election if he'd only engaged in a different style of communication in the last 60 days.
What does that tell you about a Republican candidate next time? If there's somebody who adopts the policies more or less of Donald Trump, but does some of the things you think Donald Trump should have done?
Well, the problem is, or the challenge, I should say, because it's not a problem, is that if Donald Trump decides that he wants to stay involved, he will stay involved. And the Republican Party will listen to him first. So it's possible, and we've not talked about this, that he could actually freeze the election for the next 4 years. The only challenge to that is the fact that Kevin McCarthy is only a few seats away from a majority in the House, that it is a 50-50 proposition that Mitch McConnell will be the majority leader in the Senate, and that there will be other divergent factors that will cause people to listen to other Republicans. But if Donald Trump wants to have a voice, he's going to have a voice.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Thank you so much. It is always such a pleasure to talk with you, Frank. That is Frank Luntz of Luntz Global. Coming up, don't expect a V-shaped recovery for New York or for San Francisco. That's what Connor Sen of Bloomberg Opinion says, and we're going to ask him exactly why he thinks that. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.